I'm gonna just walk over there and get things started, and then I'll just try to. Yeah. Yep. Okay, guys, please have a seat. Please have a seat.
Buenos dias. Okay. Today's speaker is a graduate of Allegheny Community College and Frostburg State University. He counts among his inspirations the renowned primatologist Dian Fossey, Kung Fu master Bruce Lee, rap pioneers Public Enemy, three-time Tour de France winner Greg LeMond, and that most famous of revolutionaries, Jesus Christ. He has written extensively on zombies, guns, roller coasters, and BMX racing. It took him no less than a decade to complete his undergraduate education, though he finished on top, earning the distinction of valedictorian. He then went on to Michigan Law School, during which time he won the National Rifle Association Law Scholarship Contest with his paper, Guns to the Left of Me, Firearm Ownership as a Neglected Civil Right. At one point, he quit law school to work loading trucks for UPS. Other positions he has held in his illustrious career include bike shop worker, 7-Eleven cashier, phlebotomist, police dispatcher in Western Maryland, and federal probation officer in Brooklyn. Upon graduating law school, he began work as a judicial clerk at the DC Court of Appeals, and then turned down a six-figure offer from a major corporate law firm in order to work and make much less money as an assistant U.S. attorney. Along this road, he fell in love with and married a pacifist, abstract artist and librarian, and they had a son. Currently, our speaker is the senior research attorney for the National Rifle Association Institute for Legislative Action. I hope that today's assembly will help bring some nuance to our discussions on guns and gun control and the aforementioned organization. I now present to you a gentleman I may often disagree with on political questions, but always respect as a thinker and love as my older brother, Mr. Christopher Zeeland. And Chris, I know you to be a man of character and integrity, as our mission statement expresses, and you've chosen a path with the idea of making a positive contribution to society. That choice has left you smack in the middle of one of the most heated debates in our country. So I hope you'll tell us a little about how that debate got so ugly and how you navigate discussions on gun control with the other side, which includes, in your case, many loved ones. Thank you. Christopher Zeeland.
All right, Manny, thank you for that introduction. Everybody hear me okay? Mike picking up all right? Yep, good. All right. You have a gun with 2 rounds in it. You're in a room with the leader of ISIS, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and a lawyer. What are you going to do? Shoot the lawyer twice. So yeah, I'm a lawyer, and I work for the gun lobby. Now, my guess is that my views on guns don't represent the dominant viewpoint of the faculty or student body of this institution, and my time here is limited. So my goal today isn't to persuade you. It's to give you a glimpse into the gun control debate from an insider perspective, and to provide some thoughts on why it's so hard to move forward with it. I can tell you this, it's my privilege to advocate for the rights of America's gun owners. When it comes to gun control, I'm Dr. No through and through. I take unapologetic pride in that. But I don't take pride in how we talk to each other on the issue of guns. So what I'd like to do is give you the top 3 reasons why I believe people talk past each other on firearms. Then I'd like to share my top 4 strategies for maintaining my humanity while working in ground zero of America's most corrosive culture war issue. Now, each generation has its own existential trip that drives public policy. For my generation, it was the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation. I actually wrote President Reagan a letter after my brother Matthew was born, and I sent him Maddie's little baby picture. I told him we needed nuclear disarmament. In 1983, a movie came out called The Day After. It very vividly depicted a full-scale nuclear war in its aftermath. That was literally traumatizing to me because my generation really believed that could be our future. Then came September 11th, 2001. I was in New York City, and thousands of people died right before my eyes. Many of us who were there felt acutely vulnerable and sad for a long time. I share this because, while I have to be calculating and technical in my job, I don't dismiss the trauma that people experience when innocent lives are taken. Being a lawyer and working for the NRA requires you to have a thick skin. It doesn't immunize you to horror. In fact, my first point is that how we deal with our communal and personal vulnerabilities is really the essence of the gun control debate. And I want to start here because I think this is the biggest area of overlap between the two sides, and one place where we can potentially empathize with one another. We all want to be safe and to feel safe. We all want our kids to go to school without worrying about getting hurt. We all want to protect our communities and loved ones. The irony here, and what makes the gun control debate such a tough issue, is that the exact same desires are pushing decent people in opposite directions. I also think that while these tendencies usually fall along a continuum, people tend to move toward the poles when they feel especially vulnerable. One pole is people who believe any gun, at least in private hands, is inherently threatening and destabilizing. The other pole is for people for whom having a firearm or many firearms is tangible evidence that they are not helpless and that they are doing something noble and proactive to guard against an unpredictable world. So I think in the nature of things, you're not going to get consensus between these two groups. But I don't think people in the two groups need to hate each other for wanting the same things. Another issue is what I call institutionalized lack of trust. Ever since the Battle of Concord, part of our national story has been the government coming for your guns is the final straw. And what the Second Amendment is ultimately about is the idea that, should all other constitutional mechanisms fail, the people will have one last fighting chance to protect their natural rights. And we've obviously given up on the idea in America that we're not going to have a professional standing army. But there are still people who strongly believe that the right to keep and bear arms is the canary in the coal mine of our constitutional order. By that way of thinking, any new restriction on Second Amendment rights becomes not just a threat to your hobby, but a prelude to further crackdowns on other cherished rights. And the opposing sides of the gun control debate don't trust each other either. Those of us who have been around guns for a long time remember when gun control advocacy groups were openly calling for a comprehensive handgun ban, if not a ban on all guns. Washington, D.C. and Chicago actually did ban handguns. But the U.S. Supreme Court eventually said that's unconstitutional. Then the exact same advocacy groups and gun control activists turned around and said, okay, now we just want reasonable public safety regulations to ensure that guns don't fall into the wrong hands. Who can argue with that? In practice, though, that meant licensing and registration procedures that involved hundreds of dollars, dozens of hours, and multiple trips to city offices during the workday. Nobody on our side thought that they were being reasonable or trying in good faith to comply with the court's decision. We just thought they were trying to keep law-abiding people from getting guns. And the slippery slope. A retired U.S. Supreme Court justice wrote an op-ed in the New York Times just last month calling for outright repeal of the Second Amendment. What are we supposed to think? Gun control advocates, meanwhile, clearly don't trust the NRA to behave by legal or civilized norms. Well, sometimes I don't even know if they actually believe what they say about us. I certainly wouldn't want anything to do with the kind of people that they claim we are. When my brother first asked me to give this talk, my first thought was, that's not going to be a friendly audience, especially not now. But I trust my brother. I trust the reputation of this school, and I trust you all as scholars to at least give me a fair hearing. And my brother, well, he apparently trusts me not to be at least a complete jackass. Skepticism can be healthy, but we can't discard trust altogether if we're going to remain a civilized nation. So I take being accurate and forthright in my work very seriously. I want you to know that you can stand on the things that I say, and I want to be able to believe that all of you as well. The final problem I want to mention is ignorance. Public policy as it relates to firearms combines considerations of history, law, technology, and empirical evidence that can confound judges and legislatures, to say nothing of the media and the public. Some people try to get things right and simply make mistakes. Others, however, jump on the bandwagon of doing something without even an elementary understanding of what they're actually trying to do. In the abortion debate, when women say they don't want men regulating their bodies, I get that. Because I don't want someone who's never held or fired a gun to make national policy on my Second Amendment rights. And from my perspective, the public policy debate on firearms usually misses the point and continually reinforces the most paranoid tendencies of the pro-gun side. Consider that mass shootings, as horrible as they are, represent a very minute portion of firearm-related mortality in America. Suicide, on the other hand, which disproportionately affects older white guys like me, accounts for about 2/3 of all firearm-related deaths. Then comes interpersonal homicides, which tend to be concentrated into certain geographic areas, and within those geographic areas, certain neighborhoods, and even within those neighborhoods, certain high-risk social groups. The category of firearm most often used to commit murder is the handgun. Nothing else even comes close. But gun control efforts usually focus on whatever gun was used in the latest infamous crime, rather than on the perpetrator's behavior leading up to and during the act and other points of possible intervention. There have been mass shootings using bolt-action rifles, semi-automatic rifles, pump-action shotguns, semi-automatic pistols, and revolvers. All firearms are lethal, and most major categories of firearms have some military application or nearly functional military equivalent. So once you start going down the road of banning this or that type of firearm because it's a military firearm, or because it's too dangerous, or magazines because they have too high a capacity, you're never going to convince somebody like me that you're ever going to stop. Because that logic demands that you respond to the next infamous crime committed with a different category of firearm or magazine in exactly the same way. The RAND Corporation, which has nothing to do with the NRA, just finished a huge 2-year, multi-million-dollar review of existing firearm-related research to see what sorts of gun control laws really made a difference. And there were thousands of these studies that they looked at. And they had to pare them down to just a few dozen to actually get to the ones that were rigorous enough to offer any sort of useful conclusion. Well, what they found is there's really not that much evidence that any of these laws make a difference, at least when it comes to preventing violent crime. And when you're trying to take away aspects of people's rights, you bear the burden of proof. Now, we've gone through so many years of pro-gun people pointing out these sort of things. The anti-gun activists have coined a term. It's called gunsplaining. And it mocks the idea that these kinds of facts or details even matter. Well, my response to that is they do matter if you're trying to solve problems. They don't matter if all you're trying to do is provide some sort of illusory reassurance or to persecute people for owning guns. Now, I will say, on the other hand, I think the pro-gun community has shown ignorance in either missing opportunities for outreach to people of color or reaching out in awkward or ineffective ways. And that was largely the topic of the paper that my brother mentioned to you earlier. The cultural competence on our side, unfortunately, is lacking. So yeah, it's a frustrating and contentious world in which I work. But I focus on 4 things to keep me sane and to hopefully prevent myself from becoming the caricature of the hateful, paranoid gun nut. And if I've come across today as a hateful, paranoid gun nut, then I guess these don't work. But number 1 is faith in God, what Lisa Simpson calls the last resort of a scoundrel. Now, I don't claim that God is for or against the NRA, but religious practices and a relationship with God mold the conscience and keep me out of at least some kinds of trouble. Number 2 is maintaining close personal relationships with people who are different from me. As my brother already mentioned, I'm married to a Quaker, which is a pacifist religious sect, who grew up in Massachusetts and went to Oberlin College. We met at the wedding of a mutual friend who years later recognized he was gay and moved out to Hollywood to pursue an acting career. And of course, there's my diverse, multicultural, super liberal family. Really, it sounds like the pitch for a sitcom. And it's true, we drive each other nuts. But we've been through a lot together, and we are committed to going the distance with one another. Number 3 is I have avocations outside of work that I pursue avidly and that have absolutely nothing to do with my profession. On Saturday, I go to a dog training club in Columbia, Maryland that includes a Muslim from Singapore. We both love dogs and flavored milk. On Sunday, I go BMX racing with my kid and my buddies from as far away as Columbia. Columbia the country, not Columbia, Maryland. Not only are these things fun and interesting, I get to experience the humanity and camaraderie of people who think and believe differently than I do without the interaction laying a big, heavy trip on anybody. Now, number 4, I keep a sense of humor, or I try. Life is difficult. Life can be tragic. But it doesn't have to be joyless or humorless. In Scotland, a man was criminally convicted last month for posting offensive jokes on YouTube. And they were offensive, and I didn't think they were funny. But that's a criminal conviction for speech. In Britain, a store refused to sell a 16-year-old boy 2 teaspoons that his grandma asked him to buy for fear he would use them as weapons. Sadly, I'm not kidding about those things. But this is America. And you are going to have to pry my teaspoons and my bad jokes from my cold, dead hands. All right, guys, thank you for your attention. And if you have questions,
Thank you, Chris. If you guys have questions or you'd like to engage Chris in conversation about guns or BMX racing or zombies, we're going to be in room 101 in the Lumen Center, so you can get your lunch and come on up. We'll be there. Thanks.
All right. We're going to take some announcements. We'll start with faculty.
We're gonna go full screen again.
Yeah. Full screen again. There you go.
When you're exit full screen here, while you're still plugged in. Now go full screen.
He's been a mainstay on the defense for at least the last 3 years.
Piper Bond skip pass behind. Now it's already back up. Billy Spillman. Great Abe Lincoln's mullet. Talk about getting your hands free in an instant.
Well, I'm really impressed also. Gilman's moving the ball really effectively. A lot of it starts with Demuth and Bond. Nice pass here. And Spillman, there's one thing we do know about him. He has a cannon for a shot. Just
playing BL is special. Period. End of story. The field's the same for both teams. The weather's the same for both teams. It does. That doesn't make a difference. BL Gilman is a special lacrosse game, and
guys went out and earned it. And that's what we were telling. That's what I was just telling them right there. They've earned it through all the hard work and practice over the weeks. And so I'm just so happy, for them because they just kept after it. And coming back towards that in the second half, that's just a tough thing to do on this field. And so I'm really proud of our guys. And
we'll see them again, and they'll be ready for us as always.
Thanks for coming on, Brooks.
Thank you.
Don't you think that it's boring how people talk? Making smart with the words again. Well, I'm bored. Because I'm doing this for the thrill of it, killing it, never not chasing a million things I want. And I am only as young as the minute is full of it, getting pumped up on the little bright things I want. But I know they'll never own me. It looked alright in the pictures. Getting caught half of the trip though, isn't it? I fall apart with all my heart, and you could watch from your window.